Living Power with Dan Hurst.
The third thing that happens, or that you need to do when you're facing these charges in your life and these things to distract you from doing God's will, is that you are to handle the intimidation. There's going to be those times when it really ramps up and things really get ugly in your life. Handle the intimidation. How do you do that? Well, let's look at Nehemiah chapter 6, starting with verse 10. Now, when I went into the house of Shemaiah, the son of Deliah, they had the weirdest names back in those days. There were no Smiths or Jones. Have you noticed that? He was confined to his home. That's an important phrase right there. He was confined to his home. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple. Let us close the doors of the temple, for they're coming to kill you. They are coming to kill you by night. But I said, should such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in. And I understood and saw that God had not sent him, but he had pronounced the prophecy against me, because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. For this purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act in this way and sin, and so they could give me a bad name in order to taunt me. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, oh my God, according to these things that they did, and also the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who want to make me afraid. Now, we don't really know who Shemaiah was. He was some sort of religious leader, perhaps a temple priest. More than likely he was a self-proclaimed prophet, because of the wording that he uses here. Claimed to be a prophet. In any case, he was under the control of Tobiah and Sanballat, according to verse 12. And here we see a very sober warning that the enemy will even use religious leaders, false teachings, false prophecies to get you out of God's will. Things that sound spiritually right, but are completely misleading and dangerous. Listen, I see this all the time, and you do too. And there are people, I see some stuff on television, on some of the religious channels on television, that are just out and out blasphemous lies, where they just take the word and distort it and do some things that are just so deceptive and wrong. You know, I'm amazed at watching some of these, quote, televangelists, and how what they're doing is just simply, all they're doing is asking for money. I mean, I'll tell you who I consider to be one of the biggest false prophets in the business. And that can go on the internet as far as I'm concerned. But if you ever come across the program on TV, every few minutes he's asking for money. I mean, where is the truth? If he's a messenger sent by God, then he needs to be teaching and let God be his provision and his source. I mean, that's just the bottom line, folks. God is the provision. God is the source. Let me give you a contrast. And I learned this very early in my ministry. When I was serving down in Florida, I was associate pastor there, and the pastor was Lou Miller. And back in those days, CDs hadn't been invented yet, and everything was on cassettes. And we had a cassette ministry. And Lou's teachings they were recorded every Sunday and Wednesdays. And his teachings were recorded, and we put things on the cassette, and then we'd make them available to people that wanted the teachings. And it grew by the thousands. I mean, those cassettes were going out weekly. And they were going all over the world. And missionaries were using them, and they were taking them, and they were using for Bible studies. And they were taking his teachings and using them in home studies. And it was just amazing how God blessed that ministry. You know, in all the years, I served down there for 8 years. In all 8 years, never once did Lou ever ask for money for that ministry. Not once. Now, where do you think the money came for when you're sending out thousands of cassettes and putting them in the mail? Just the bags alone are expensive, the little envelopes that you have to put them in. But to buy the cassettes and to buy the equipment, that you duplicate the cassettes on, put them in the envelopes, buy the postage. A lot of times the postage was sent overseas, so overseas postage is pretty expensive. It was an expensive ministry. Never once in all 8 years did he ever ask for money for that ministry. And the attitude was, the approach was, if God provides, we'll continue it. If he doesn't, we'll stop it. It's no big deal. And that was the approach. And you know that it was amazing. There were times when I remember a few weeks when it's like, well, we have no money for this. We won't send it out this week. And pretty soon here'd come a check. And we never asked for it, yet people felt compelled to give and provide and minister. That was just the way God does things. When you're doing it his way, when you're in the center of God's will, he's the provider. He's the one that brings, he is the source, the resource. He's the one that does it. You don't have to depend, you don't have to, sometimes you have to tell the people what the needs are, certainly. But it's not like you have to go out and browbeat people for those. If you're in the center of God's will, God is the provider. He's the provision. Trust him for it. And if he doesn't provide, then it's probably not his will. God's will, done God's way, never lacks for God's provision. I'd like to tattoo that on. But I don't think he'll let me. Unless I pay him. Wait, don't put that on there, okay? All right, Brian, don't put that one on, okay? So anyway. But anyway, my point is this, that we have to be so careful and recognize that God is our provision. And I don't even know how I got off on that. But anyway, Shemaiah was some sort of religious leader and some sort of prophet, and he was under the control of Tobiah and Sanballat. And the enemy is going to use religious leaders and false teachers and false prophecies to get you out of God's will. Things that sound spiritually right, but are completely misleading and dangerous. You need to make sure that you take whatever you're taught and go to the Word and compare it. Never take anything I say as gospel truth. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. You take anything that I say and you go right to the Word and compare it. Am I teaching the truth? Am I right? Is what I'm saying lined up with the Word of God? Never trust anything that I say. You make sure that it lines up with the Word of God. That is your responsibility. That's true with any teacher. That's true with any preacher. Any preacher, you just simply don't accept what they have to say. Go to the Word of God and line it up with what the Word of God says and see if they're teaching the truth. That's so important to do.